Oh boy, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy. I'm Wes, the Explosion, and this week, the Mega Man Zero Timelines issue 1 dropped. Not to put too much pressure on the comic, but Zero is my favorite character. This being my favorite iteration of him, it competes with X as my favorite of the series. It has my favorite plot and art style, and this adaptation's written by Ian Flynn, who I'm a fan of from his work on the Sonic the Hedgehog comics and previous run on Archie's Mega Man, so expectations are high. But does issue 1 live up to my lofty hopes? Do I think more casual audiences will latch onto it? And does the book deserve a full series? Well, let's give it a look and see what we think. As I did previously, I'll be breaking things up into no spoiler, light spoilers, and then major spoilers, so check the timestamps if you want to avoid any of that, and I'll be using only the free preview pages and my personal gameplay for visuals. Again, the book is written by Ian Flynn, who did not only the other 2 things that I mentioned, but also a 1-issue preview comic of ARMS that unfortunately never came to fruition, so I guess you could say that video game adaptations are one of his specialties. Art is by Hanzo Steinbach, who while he didn't do the X Timelines issue, has been queued up for the ongoing X series. And as with the previous timelines, Marshall Dillon is on lettering. Disappointingly, according to the cover checklist, there's only 4 this time, which isn't the biggest deal. I was only getting 3 for each anyway, and maybe I'll try to snag the 4th this time so that I have a full set. It just kinda shows where their expectations are at. Classic and X got 13 each, and while I'm not gonna argue that Zero is just as big of a deal, that much of a drop-off... Yeesh, where's your faith, Udon? Though at least this one will be much easier on collectors. I think you can get them all off of Udon's online store. Anyway, I'll probably talk about it more if I do a cover review. It'll be shorter, but I really want to tackle Zero yet. But it's another boss select, which Zero 1 didn't have, along with Zero himself. The ones used here are the 8 from the boss rush at the end of Zero 1, along with Copy X at the top, so they're making use of all 9 spaces. Zero's pose does match up pretty closely to the official art, and the background has the same color scheme as those traumatizing mission report cards, so it really does remind me of the first game, perhaps a bit too well. It also gives you a pretty good idea of what to expect from the inside. The designs are faithful, but feel less anime and a little more comic book, which, given the format, I think works well and strikes a nice balance. I'm happy with the visuals and look forward to Steinbach's work on X. The writing is good. It focuses a lot on world building, as you'd expect from Flynn, though it does feel a bit like he's casting his net too wide. That is kind of the nature of a one-shot though. No matter how big of a story you want to tell, you're limited to the issue you got with how many pages you were allotted. Oh, and while I am aware of the typos with some of the character names, Harpunya, I don't want to bog things down talking about that, so we're gonna gloss over it, at least for this video. Instead, we'll move on to the basic premise, which I'll have to mention some general elements for, so this is your light spoiler warning. The issue takes place between the events of Zero 1 and Zero 2, and we're bounced between 3 main points of view: Zero, the Guardians, and the Resistance. Specifically, Zero, Harpuya, Fafnir, Leviathan, Ciel, El Piso, and just the general populace members as a cast. And as you can probably imagine, that's a good bit for just 20 pages or so. Zero's parts take up about half the issue, though I still left feeling like he showed up less than I expected, given the title of the book. That might also be due to how little he speaks. That does fit his character. At this point, he's more of a man of action, coming off as stoic with little to say and letting his blade do the talking, but I swear, his previous iteration in X Timelines got more dialogue, which, again, fits and ain't necessarily a bad thing, it just feels somehow weird. He does get in some fight scenes, with some nice choreography that I think would look pretty awesome animated. So even if he's not running his mouth, what he does get is still great. Because this is a bridging story, there's some allusions to the events of Zero 1, largely expressed through some single images from Harpuya's memories. It's a pretty good use of show, don't tell, but as someone who replays the games fairly regularly, it's pretty easy for me to recall the full context of what's being shown. The way it's handled reminds me a lot of when you pick up a random issue of a comic, they reference something that happened previously with enough details that you get the gist, but there's an editor's note listing the issue when it occurred, in case someone wants to go back and get the full details. While I think they do get across the main points, I just hope that it doesn't leave anyone feeling like they're missing the bigger story, since the full context here is Zero 1, a game that is very hard to play due to how it's formatted. But me bringing it up as a potential problem is probably just my paranoia. most folks probably don't need an exposition dump. The Resistance stuff is mostly just to establish the roles of CL and El Piso in Zero 2. This is the only part of the book that feels like it has exactly as much time as it needs and not leave me wanting more. In fact, all of this is definitely the sort of thing that makes me want to see what a full series would look like, both with how previous events would be portrayed and where they take the characters going forward from here. So as a one-shot meant to gauge interest, I'd say this does its job. Summary time, so big spoilers, bounce if you're looking to read this yourself first. Zero's fighting Pantheons in the desert, which should sound familiar to anyone who's at least started Zero 2. As he wraps up, he hears a transport getting attacked by Pantheon launchers, and they don't have the resources to escape. Luckily, Zero swoops in, stealing one of the sleds to destroy all their pursuers, though his battles begin to take a toll on him. The people he rescued are appreciative though, and after thanking him, offer to patch him up. Zero's taken to a secret colony populated by Neo Arcadia evacuees, and after a bit of exposition, he's introduced to a repairman, or would Doctor be more appropriate? We then jump to Harpuya, who's being grilled by Neo Arcadia's Human Council about the events of Zero's raid at the end of the first game. They're concerned about the rumors and the absence of both Master X and Phantom, but Harpuya downplays and denies what actually happened, wanting to avoid causing a panic. He then touches base with Fafnir and Leviathan privately, and after a bit of a squabble, Leviathan gets a lead on Zero, though before they can react, they get another alert about an attack by the Resistance. Two members are at the scene. One seems to be following CL's philosophy and is upset at the other, who seems under direct orders from El Piso for his flashy and destructive actions. The Guardians show up and they easily kill both Resistance members. We then transition to the Resistance base, where CL is praising El Piso and asking him to take up the commander position. After a bit of persuasion, he accepts, and as CL leaves, he's informed of the loss of the two soldiers to the Guardians, which El Piso uses towards his own ends. Meanwhile, the transport is under attack again, and Zero offers to buy them time until they can get it up and running. He's given a free cloak though before he heads out, and the last 2 pages are all action. The only text being sound effects. Getting it out of the way at the top, we see the Met from classic timelines, the dud that Mega Man patched up, wandering through a sandstorm, and he comes upon Zero fighting. He shows up again, so I'll talk more about him then, but it seems like this little guy is going to show up in all of the one-shots, so the cameo is important. Anyway, Zero is ripping through the Pantheons, and the way he's moving and how the enemy parts are going flying, it reminds me a lot of the ending scene in Zero 1, though it's stated that it takes place months after that, so it's not, it's likely just an homage. Zero's using his saber and buster simultaneously, so obviously either Type B or custom control scheme, and the triple rod and shield boomerang were destroyed in between games, them needing to be repurposed or repaired after the intro stage. So him just using sword and gun is a nice detail that hints that we might be pretty close to the start of Zero 2. Speaking of, Pantheon launchers were an enemy exclusive to that game, though the truck rescue feels pretty similar to the start of Zero 4, so this is probably another reference. Also, you know those little bobbleheads some people put on their dashboards? The transport has one of Data from Mega Man Legends. Cute. The people he saves are dressed similarly to the ones from the Resistance, though they claim no association, so maybe it's just standard garb, maybe they're secondhand, maybe some of them have a history. After the fight, some cloaked figures scavenge the broken parts, which, that sort of thing is pretty standard desert sci-fi economic fare. Zero is also resistant to accepting help, though he does wind up going along with them, and this was the period where Zero was committed to fighting all by himself, so that's a nice consistency. The place they go to is called X02, or perhaps X02, which has both X and Zero in the name, and this does take place before Zero 2, so I mean, it's not hard to draw meaning here. In the marketplace, we see some people with ears, which might be a weird thing to pick out, but at first I couldn't tell definitively who was human and who was Reploid. While fairly uncommon, Rock and Roll did have ears and they were just robot masters, so it doesn't seem like it'd be too much of a stretch for Reploids to have them too, and even CL doesn't pop hers out. The little coverings over their ears could just be to keep out the desert sand or communication devices, but given that they look pretty similar to Resistance members, I'm just gonna assume that they're Reploids and this is just kind of the basic uniform for the human types. Plus, it seems weird to show ears on just the one family of 3 unless it's meant to communicate something. Still not 100% though, since at least the guy showing Zero around talks like Reploids are a separate species to him, but the marketplace has robot parts for sale, and they talk about having Reploid power cells, so at the very least, I'm gonna say that the colony population is probably mixed. That it is hard to tell does humanize them though. Maybe if they are just people with different insides, killing them is pretty much murder, even genocide. Given that Neo Arcadia is undergoing an energy crisis and humans are prioritized, that does mean that if these guys are Reploids, they weren't just superfluous and were seen as having some purpose or worth. Reploid or human though, that these guys couldn't abide Neo Arcadia's persecution of Reploids, them saying that they lived by the teachings of X before he went crazy, it says a lot about their character. While I don't remember people leaving Neo Arcadia being a crime until 04, Zero's guide explains that everything that exits the city is considered stolen, given the limited resources, which makes sense. The guy who repairs Zero has an eye patch and is missing part of his cheek, which is pretty grisly, though it further backs up my assumption that he's a Reploid, since I'm not sure they could get away with that for a human. Though he does sweat, so luckily there's no drool to accompany that. He also mentions knowing that the Resistance can be reckless, which implies that he either got disfigured working for or fighting against them. They also mention a few rumors about Zero's raid at the end of the first game, which tells you that people are vaguely aware that something happened, but don't know the specifics, though when asked if he knows anything, Zero's quick to change the subject. That goes right into Harpuya's scene, where he stands before the Galactic Senate. The Central Council. They're upset about the rumors too, and are very disturbed that they haven't seen Copy X for a while. These are probably the most lore-packed 2 pages in the issue. One member says, "We nearly lost our way of life." In 03, complacency is a pretty big theme. Humans don't really seem to care what happens, as long as their lives can continue on peacefully, be that the retiring of Reploids to conserve resources, or via firing a missile into someone else's section of the city. Reading between the lines a bit, I get the impression that what this guy is mad about is that his life almost became a little less comfortable. Another says that they need his loving guidance, in reference to Copy X, which, oof. Loving guidance is quite the phrase, and that, combined with Neo Arcadia, which could be read as New Paradise, and Copy X's angelic form, makes him seem more like a religious figure than a leader. While some have left Neo Arcadia when Copy X started going off the rails, it's clear that many still view him as a messiah. This also gives us a look into the governance of Neo Arcadia. Copy X rules, but the council manages the daily affairs, and I guess the Guardians and Mutos Reploids carry out the important stuff to keep everything running. Honestly wondering if the council does much or if it's just a participation thing to make them feel like they still have a voice. Anyway, Harpuya just kinda lies, denying that the Inner Circle was beaten by a single intruder, and that both Phantom and Copy X are still alive investigating the attack due to how serious it was, and Harpuya's in charge until they get back. While a bit of pride creeps into his reasoning, he seems to mainly want to avoid a panic. Allegedly, only the remaining Guardians and Zero know what really happened. And I'm gonna be honest, I'm not sure if this is accurate or not. I don't recall the end of the first game being a secret, but there's a lot of hard to come by supplemental information, and we really only see things from the perspective of the Resistance. El Pizo's Operation Righteous Strike was meant to capitalize on Copy X's absence, though maybe he learned about it later, or maybe it wasn't as well hidden as Harpuya thought. He could have at least kept it a secret from the citizens though, and hey, here's the thing, this could be a reinterpretation, not a game-accurate adaptation. The important thing is that it does feel believable, to the point that I did have to review a cutscene to determine if at least El Pizo knew. I don't mind creative liberty, I'm mostly just scrutinizing it so that I know how much to expect things to line up. Anyway, when talking with the other Guardians, Fafnir doesn't like it and almost gets into a fight with Leviathan. And given that he's the hot-headed one and both of them are portrayed as battle maniacs while Harpuya, the leader, manages to calm the situation, that checks out. Also interesting that Leviathan is the one that pins down Zero's location, and when the power generator gets destroyed, she's the one with the insight on how that'll just make things worse for Reploids in Neo Arcadia, since there'll be less energy to sustain them. I guess Sage Harpuya is the wise one, whereas Fairy Leviathan is the smart one. Or maybe I shouldn't try to assign archetypes to them. There's also a line thrown in about fighting for X's dream of everlasting peace, which is a cute little reference to almost the tagline for Mega Man. Also interesting is how Leviathan has a floating bubble that she can use to sit or stand on, so it's neat that they gave her a way to still use water even when she's not in the water. Anyway, the 2 Resistance members are dressed more like the humans in the caravan from 04, so they might have been disguising themselves. Them bickering demonstrates the differences in thinking between CL and El Piso. One wants to quickly and quietly get what they came for, the other wants a fight. I could see this being expanded upon and the Resistance developing into two factions if this got an ongoing, though at least it highlights how things are changing in the Resistance. While one worries about the Guardians, the other says that if Zero beat them, why can't they? The Guardians do arrive and Fafnir says about how they're nowhere near Zero's level, which is another really good exchange. On one hand, it shows how exemplary Zero is. He did what no one should have been able to, and the Guardians acknowledge his skill. On the other, it shows how a few victories can go to someone's head, as well as how dangerous it can be when someone makes something look easy when it's really not. Anyway, the Guardians slaughter the pair, Leviathan defending and then staggering them, Fafnir killing the arrogant one in a single blast, and Harpooya chasing down the other and flying circles around him before delivering a fatal strike. Guy gives off some blood, which seems weird for a robot, but... Harpooya also is able to guess that someone new is running the Resistance by the different tactics they're running. This is all obviously meant to show off how capable the Guardians are, not just with their combat abilities, but also how quickly they figure stuff out. Though 3 of the strongest warriors up against 2 goobers ain't exactly all that impressive. I mean, they do it efficiently and callously, but just one of them could have handled this. The first time you meet Harpooya, he's just taken out a whole squad, other than Kolber. I guess I'm just bloodthirsty and want a higher body count. I just wish there were more pages so that we could get a real fight to show off their full capabilities, though this at least serves as an appetizer. Moving on, the base scene is largely reminiscent of the beginning of Zero 2, though rather than El Piso questioning whether it was really a good idea he be made commander, it's CL convincing him to take the position in the first place. El Piso fiddles with his hair, which is a cute little way to make it seem like he's bashful or doubting himself, and we get the spiel from CL about all he's accomplished and about how him taking over for her would allow her to develop her energy alternative. We also get a little discussion about how El Piso wants to be aggressive but CL wants to settle things peacefully. It all feels pretty beat for beat except for one little thing at the end. When the report comes in about the deaths of the 2 failed Resistance members, he makes sure CL is out of the room before taking it, then immediately sets them up as martyrs and gives further orders to keep it from CL's ears. While he calls the deaths tragic, his expression doesn't seem all that upset, and when the Guardians first showed up, one guy wanted to run while the other called for a squad that didn't exist, so there's a fair chance that El Piso set them up to die to rile up his troops and escalate things. Not only that, but he would have given these orders before his commander position was finalized, so he did all this behind CL's back. He's a lot more conniving than I remember, and at the start of Zero 2, he still seemed to not have confidence and defer to CL on a lot of things. Then again, maybe that was an act kinda like he seems to be doing here, or maybe this is just a different interpretation. I did say that not everything seemed to be matching up, or maybe the way that I see El Piso is just inaccurate. If I can do a bit of self-promo though, I do have a character dive into the guy that I'll link at the end. My own biases and attachment to personal headcanon aside, this does set him up really well as a comic book villain. And finally, back to our titular character. Neo Arcadia is bearing down on the transport again. We get a fun back and forth where the driver says that they have no chance and Zero says he'll take care of it. I love the bit where they say that they won't be able to wait for Zero when they get going again and he just says, "Then don't." We then finally get the origin story of the cloak that Zero wears in the Zero 2 intro, the truck's gunner giving it to him as a memento as he leaves. Since the scavengers earlier were also wearing them, I imagine it's standard issue when they need to be out in the sand for any extended period of time. There's a part of me that's reminded of Solo, where they explain the origin of his last name, blaster, Kessel Run, and Millennium Falcon's onboard computer, which is a lot of information that nobody asked for. But here, it's a nice, neat little touch that I maybe never questioned, but keeps it interesting by not being excessive. With the cloak, setting, weapons, and enemies he's fighting, more Pantheons and an electric golem, this does match up pretty closely with the start of Zero 2, though I'd still guess that there's a bit of time between now and then, since it would have had to be a pretty shoddy patch job for him to finally collapse from his continuous battles right after receiving maintenance, and it would have been even wilder that Harpooya would save Zero after just having a pretty cruddy day due largely to his actions. Then again, with Leviathan's information earlier, they would know his whereabouts to find him, so maybe this does lead directly in. We get 2 more panels with the Patchman, him just continuing forward through the desert with lights from the battle seen in the distance. It seemed pretty forced in the X timelines, him just running in and not really doing anything at the end. In an interview with Shadowrock, Daniel Arsenault did say that he originally had something more subtle planned, which I think I would have liked better, but I guess someone wanted it to be more overt. Hence the kind of shoehorned implementation. I like how the Met's used here though. Well, to a degree. Him just wandering and then coming across Zero's battle twice makes it seem like life goes on outside of the events of the book. In a way, it kinda goes hand in hand with how Zero's doing his thing, Neo Arcadia theirs, the Guardians something else, and the Resistance having their business. Sure, they each affect each other and are part of a larger story, but it's not like nothing happens when Zero leaves the room, letting the Met just act as a passerby. On the other hand, I wouldn't feel like the book would be missing out on much if the Met was gone. I think it was used as a good zoom in, then zoom out to bookend the issue, so I don't feel like he stole panels from anyone else. I just kinda hope that it doesn't get to that point in the 2 issues we got left, though I guess I could just look at him as the Stan Lee of the Timelines one-shots. Fun to watch out for, and then sad when they stopped happening. So did this live up to my expectations? Kind of. Mostly. Yes. I think to some degree, I might have built this one up too much in my head, to the point where nothing was ever gonna measure up, but I'm not left feeling disappointed and I still really like it. Easily my favorite so far and likely will remain. While I have a few concerns, my biggest complaint here is just that I want more, which is a good place to leave a reader when the goal is a full series. That said, it does make things a little awkward as a one-shot. This doesn't really feel like a standalone title. It feels more like an issue 17 of an ongoing comic. Heck, maybe even a 17 and 18, given how much stuff was squeezed in that I wanted to see get a bit more breathing room. There's a lot of stuff that needs communicated to new readers or returning players as simply as possible, to avoid breaking up the pace or bogging down the narrative, and while you can experience the larger story by playing the games, it's the Zero series, which was made by Sadist, and the first entry is one of the roughest experiences in all of Mega Man. I've talked about how hard it is getting into Mega Man Zero many times. That said, while the gameplay is differing levels of frustration, the narrative is top-notch and this is comic books. They give you story, not remapping your controls or whatever the heck Inti Creates thought they were doing with the life system early on. So if I may, if you are at all interested, consider giving this a look. The writing's good, would be better with the full series, and I'd be happy to explain anything from Zero One that's unclear here, though I think most of it will be. If we did get a full adaptation, I think this would be a great way to get people who have been scared off by Aztec Falcon back into it. I've made my plea, so now, let me turn it back to you. Did you get this one? What did you think? And would you want to see an ongoing Mega Man Zero comic? With that, thanks as always for watching, and maybe consider subscribing if you're into retro games, especially Mega Man. I normally cover those, Udon's just been cranking these bad boys out and it's a rare opportunity to have something current to talk about when it comes to Mega Man.